What did you really want to talk about that nobody asked? This is
We
your last
did
chance.
have an idea, actually, that we might talk about what happens to people when they play games. He was going to talk about that, and I was going to talk about what happened to people when they engage in culture, generally. But that's a long story. I mean...
So that's two long stories you've got.
There's two long stories, yes. So
Start
I think
with the
we've
culture
sort
and work back to the game. I'll bet you can do a short version.
Yeah.
Start with culture, okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, the short version. My definition of culture, which I've used for quite a few years now, is culture is everything you don't have to do. So you have to wear clothes, at least in this climate you do, but you don't have to wear these particular clothes. We could all just wear sacks, actually, couldn't we? You have to eat, but you don't have to develop complex and beautiful cuisines. So there's a layer of things we have to do, otherwise we wouldn't survive. And then there's a huge layer on top of that, which is stylistic, essentially. And we spend a lot of our time thinking about that stylistic layer. So I started asking myself, since that's the layer that I make my living in, a long time ago, why are we so interested in that? What are we doing when we engage in stylistic play like that? And I think it's to cut very quickly to the end of this 1 hour explanation, I think what's really going on is that we are engaging in some kind of simulation activity. So when we look at stylistic things, we're very sensitive to what's different in one hairstyle, for example, than another. And we're very sensitive to what those differences imply to us. You know, he's got a rather feminine hairstyle. He looks really gay. He looks very masculine. He looks this, she looks that. And we read these cues from hairstyles quite without thinking about it. And we make choices about our own. Well, I don't very much, but... and so what we're doing always, I think, is when we see any stylistic object, we're seeing in that a little tiny microcosm of some kind, a little set of implications about a world picture. And that, you know, you can see how that's clearly the case in a novel, but I think it's also the case in an earring or in a cupcake, a decorated cake, you know. So I think what we're doing then is we're constantly looking at these things to imagine what would that kind of world be like? What would it be like to be that kind of person who wears that kind of hair? What would it be like to like that kind of picture? And I think we do this at sort of some levels of remove. We watch ourselves doing it. We watch ourselves surrendering to objects of culture because we can surrender to them because they don't hurt us, essentially. That's the best thing about art, is that it isn't life. You can switch it off or walk away from it. So therefore you can surrender to it as well. And the act of surrendering to something is really the act of, for a little while, agreeing to live in that particular world with its particular values and seeing what it's like. And I think this is because the strongest difference between humans and other creatures is that we're capable of imagining. And that's exactly what imagining is. Imagining is the process of thinking what else it could be like, how else things could be. And we practice that all the time, I think, with objects of culture. So that's a very poor explanation, really, but I can make it much better if I had longer.